That cheap $4 box of laundry borax hiding in the soap aisle of your local supermarket can produce tomatoes as big as softballs. An elderly gentleman named Earl Whitaker demonstrated this for over 40 consecutive summers in his small California backyard. He lived to be 91 before passing away in 2019. For 4 decades, people in his neighborhood would literally pause their cars by his property every late summer just to marvel at what was growing on his fence line. Massive, perfect heirloom varieties dangling heavily from vines over 6 feet tall. And every single one of those giant fruits was the direct result of mixing 2 level spoonfuls of ordinary laundry powder into a jug of water and pouring it onto the roots just twice a year. I promise you every word of this is true. I dedicated 2 entire summers to sitting in the underground agricultural archives at the university, poring over old farming bulletins printed between the 1920s and the 1980s. I literally traced how the recommendation to use borax slowly vanished from the pages, decade after decade, until it was completely erased. Someone decided to let this knowledge fade away. Over the next few minutes, I will walk you through the precise recipe: 2 spoonfuls, 1 gallon of water, applied twice a year. That is the entire secret. Whether you farm a large plot, use raised beds, or just have a few containers on your back porch, this technique works right now in the dirt you currently have. No expensive soil tests, no amendments, and no pricey specialty products required. Just a cheap box of borax. Stick with me, and you will never throw another $40 at a fancy bag of tomato fertilizer again. Because the solution you actually need has been sitting quietly in your grandma's washroom for half a century. Let's go back to Earl, because his garden is the starting point for this journey. He was taught this method by his dad, who picked it up from a local agricultural agent in Oklahoma during 1934. Picture 1,934. We are talking about the absolute peak of the Dust Bowl. Massive winds had scraped the rich topsoil right off the continent, taking all the crucial minerals a vegetable requires to actually produce food. People were going hungry. Gardens that used to provide reliable food were suddenly barren, and desperate farmers were willing to test out any cheap, store-bought powder if it gave them a fighting chance. The man who shared this secret was Harlan Pruitt. He was a trained soil chemist from the State College, and he knew a fundamental truth that modern fertilizer brands would rather you didn't think about. Deep down, a tomato vine does not crave heavy nitrogen the way a field of corn does. If you dump nitrogen on a tomato, you get a massive, sprawling green bush and practically zero fruit. A tomato craves boron, and the cheapest, most effective way to deliver that nutrient is basic household borax. The exact same stuff folks use to get their clothes clean. Earl's dad listened to Pruitt during the most devastating agricultural disaster in American history, and he managed to grow thriving tomatoes while the surrounding farms failed. Earl then took that knowledge to California, using it to build a local legend on his own fence for 41 years. Just 2 spoons in a jug of water. The gardening centers desperately hope you ignore this and keep buying their expensive chemical bloom boosters. But once you realize why this works, you will see it isn't some rural myth. It is hard biology. Boron is classified as a micronutrient. Tomatoes only require a microscopic amount of it compared to the big heavy hitters like nitrogen and potassium. But needing a little bit does not mean it is optional. Just as a human can suffer from lacking a tiny trace of a specific vitamin, a tomato will completely fail without boron. Without it, the plant loses the ability to transport sugars from its green leaves down into the actual tomatoes. Cell walls weaken. The pollen tubes refuse to grow. You will see your flowers turn pale, dry out, and just fall right off the stem before a single tomato forms. Meanwhile, you are left standing there, staring at bare vines, totally confused. You can dump all the standard balanced fertilizer you want on a plant starving for boron, and you will just get a giant, beautiful, dark green monster of a bush. Gorgeous leaves, thick stems, and practically zero tomatoes. It is the most frustrating thing a gardener can experience. And any tomatoes that do manage to grow will likely be awful. They end up hollow on the inside, plagued by dark cork-like rotting at the bottom, heavily scarred, and ripening in weird, stubborn patches of red and yellow. Every late summer, people look at these deformed fruits and blame the rain, the heat, the bugs, or their own lack of skill. But the reality is, you are looking at classic boron starvation. It is a known disease with a guaranteed cure that costs less than a postage stamp. Listen closely to this. In 1939, the USDA released a detailed report documenting a massive, multi-year experiment tracking how tomatoes reacted to boron in various soil types. This was legitimate science conducted by professional agronomists at a government facility. It happened during a time when federal agricultural studies existed purely to assist everyday growers in producing heavier crops on a tight budget. The data they recorded is staggering. In depleted dirt, the test groups receiving a tiny, calculated bump of boron yielded over quadruple the usable tomatoes compared to the untreated rows right beside them. Quadruple. Not a 4% bump, but 4 times the food, all from an application that cost a fraction of a single penny per vine. For 20 straight years, that pamphlet was handed out at zero cost through local agricultural extension offices nationwide. Using borax was simply common sense advice handed to anyone who asked. And then, right around the mid-60s, they silently halted the printing presses. The tips slowly vanished from the literature. In the span of a single generation, modern gardeners completely lost the words boron and borax from their vocabulary. Take Doris, a woman living near Asheville, North Carolina. She has raised heritage tomatoes on her half-acre plot for 4 decades. She is a master grower who has forgotten more gardening secrets than most of us will ever know. She stumbled onto this trick purely by chance, discovering it in a vintage booklet she bought for 25 cents at a yard sale. Prior to reading that booklet, her 40 vines typically produced about 300 pounds of food annually, which she assumed was the maximum limit for her beds. Once she initiated the 2-spoon routine, those exact same 40 vines in those exact same plots yielded between 600 and 700 pounds season after season. Her harvest literally doubled. The bulk of that increase was driven by massive late summer tomatoes that previously would have dropped their flowers or grown misshapen. Like all the great veteran growers, Doris maintains detailed journals. She has pages of records stretching back years, and she let me look at them. You can easily point to the exact summer the shift happened. Same penmanship, same garden, same heirloom seeds she always planted, but suddenly her numbers skyrocketed and stayed there forever. Imagine having 3 decades of experience under your belt and abruptly doubling your crop. The only variable was 2 small scoops of laundry powder dissolved in warm water. Now, let's talk about why the big fertilizer brands hope you never dig into this history. Back in 1960, the 4 largest chemical agriculture corporations owned roughly 38% of the consumer fertilizer industry. Fast forward to 1978. And that identical handful of companies had seized 62% of the market. Their dominance exploded during the post-war housing boom, right as millions of families moved to the suburbs and decided they wanted a backyard vegetable patch. Let's be totally fair for a second. There wasn't some shadowy corporate conspiracy or cartoon villain plotting against you. They achieved this monopoly the same way any massive industry does. They sold a slickly packaged, heavily advertised product featuring a picture-perfect vegetable on the plastic, promising you massive harvests while allowing the dirt-cheap, generic alternative to fade into obscurity. Look at it from a business perspective. Selling a $40 sack of premium tomato nutrients is incredibly profitable, especially when they convince you to buy a fresh one every single spring. Meanwhile, there is absolutely zero profit in telling a customer to skip the garden center entirely, walk into the soap aisle, and grab a $4 box that will literally last a decade. You cannot trademark basic borax. You cannot hire a marketing team to push it or buy television ads for it. Consequently, that cheap cardboard box gradually earned a reputation for being outdated, a folksy myth your grandma believed in. The extension offices stopped talking about it. The old pamphlets were thrown away, and an entire generation of backyard growers matured without learning the word boron. The actual science wasn't burned or banned. It was merely buried alive under generations of flashy, colorful plastic bags until practically everyone forgot it ever existed. So, I am unearthing this lost knowledge right now and giving you the exact steps, empowering you to walk into your backyard with total confidence The ratio is 2 perfectly flat teaspoons of classic borax, the standard green and yellow box, thoroughly dissolved into 1 full gallon of lukewarm water. I mean absolutely level spoons, no mounds. Scoop it out and run a butter knife straight across the rim to make it flush, just like a baker measuring flour for a cake. Precision is critical with this element, and we will get to why shortly. Use mildly warm water. Never boiling, never scalding. You want it roughly the temperature of a comfortable bath, right around 100 degrees, easily achieved by blending your hot and cold faucets until it feels pleasant against your skin. Seal your container and give it a vigorous shake, or stir it deeply, for about 30 to 45 seconds until every last white speck has vanished from the bottom. Let that mixture rest for 10 minutes so it incorporates entirely, and give it one final shake. That becomes your master mix, and it never expires. If you brew a larger batch than necessary, just seal the lid tightly, write a label on it, and stash it safely for weeks. Now, listen closely regarding the exact box you purchase, because getting this wrong is the main reason folks fail. You need pure, unadulterated borax. That means 100% sodium tetraborate. Period. Do not buy a laundry enhancer spiked with artificial scents, chemical brighteners, or heavy detergents. Check the back panel. The ingredient list must read sodium tetraborate and absolutely nothing else. If you see extra chemicals listed, drop it and keep looking, because nobody wants artificial perfume soaking into the earth where their vegetables grow. That single gallon of prepared water will cover roughly 20 to 30 fully grown tomato vines. Slowly drizzle about 1.5 to 2 cups around the bottom stem of each plant. Use a gentle watering can, never a high-pressure hose nozzle. You want that liquid to softly percolate into the top few inches of dirt, right where the hungry feeder roots live. Let's break down the fascinating science happening inside the stem. It is a beautiful biological process, and grasping it will make the upcoming schedule make perfect sense. As the boron breaks down in the damp soil, it gets vacuumed up by the root system and travels through the vine alongside the water it absorbs. It doesn't distribute equally. Instead, it rushes directly to the most active growth zones, the new shoots, the budding flowers, and the baby tomatoes. Once it arrives, it performs 3 vital tasks. First, it binds the pectin inside the cell structures. Think of pectin as the cement keeping the plant tissue solid. Boron acts as the rebar, weaving that cement into a resilient, stretchy net. That elasticity allows a growing tomato to expand massively without ripping open at the top, avoiding those ugly concentric scars you see on malnourished fruit. Second, and this is absolutely crucial, boron allows the pollen tube to stretch. What does that mean? When pollen drops onto a blossom, the pollination isn't complete. That tiny grain must drill a microscopic tunnel all the way down into the ovary to deposit its genetic material and lock in the fruit. Growing that tunnel relies on boron more heavily than almost any other function in the plant kingdom. This is the core secret. A deprived blossom can have flawless pollen resting on a flawless flower, and the tomato still won't form because that microscopic tunnel stops halfway. That is exactly why your blossoms fall off. That is the yellowing, dying flower. Boron prevents that failure. Finally, boron is the sugar transporter. It takes the sweet carbohydrates produced by the sunlit leaves and physically drags them down into the ripening fruit. That process dictates whether your harvest tastes like bland supermarket plastic or the kind of incredible, rich tomato you devour right there in the garden at sunset like a fresh apple. If boron is lacking, the sugar delivery system shuts down, leaving you with a decent-looking tomato that has 0 flavor. But with optimal boron, the sugar spikes. Test them side by side, and you will instantly recognize the treated tomato on the very first bite. Sturdy skin that refuses to split. Blossoms that guarantee fruit. A harvest bursting with intense flavor. 3 massive benefits, driven by a single element, delivered via 2 flat spoons in a jug of water. Before I lay out the strict timeline and the step-by-step instructions, don't click away yet, because when you apply this is just as critical as how much you apply, and getting it wrong is a big mistake. Back in the 90s, Cornell University conducted a study quantifying this flavor boost. They cultivated tomatoes designed for processing across various fields, treating some sectors with boron and ignoring others. Then, they tested the internal sugar levels, a metric farmers call Brix, which dictates overall sweetness. The treated sections scored drastically higher than the neglected fields. We're talking about the leap between a forgettable slice on a burger and a premium tomato you'd happily pay top dollar for at a rural farmer's market. Identical vines, identical rainfall, identical sunlight. The missing link was boron, and implementing that upgrade cost mere pennies per acre. Consider Roy, who manages a modest commercial tomato farm just outside Fresno. He was totally skeptical when he first caught wind of this, which makes perfect sense. Being a professional, his sheds were packed with premium name-brand micronutrient formulas applied exactly by the book. Why would a guy like him dump laundry soap on his livelihood? But his curiosity, and maybe his stubbornness, pushed him to set up a legitimate test. He treated one single acre with the Borax method, leaving his other 2 acres on the pricey chemical regimen, and let the harvest speak for itself. When picking time arrived, that single Borax acre outproduced the other 2 in usable yield. The flavor was noticeably richer, and the expense was a tiny drop in the bucket compared to the commercial jugs. The following spring, Roy transitioned his whole farm to the laundry aisle secret. He still farms that way today, saving well over $1,000 annually just on supplies while harvesting superior crops. Now, before we get to the schedule, we need to have a serious talk about safety. This is the one aspect of this technique where you can actually cause damage if you don't listen carefully. I would rather you click away right now than accidentally ruin your dirt or put your family at risk. Boron is miraculous for tomatoes in very specific, microscopic doses, but it is highly toxic to them in heavy amounts. The sweet spot between starving and overdosed is incredibly tight. You can dump double the required nitrogen on a bed and usually be fine. You cannot do that with boron. That is the precise reason I emphasize using flat spoonfuls and strictly measuring. The rule of 2 teaspoons, twice a year, isn't a random guess. It is mathematically engineered to hit that perfect nutritional threshold and hold it there. Please, hear this. Do not eyeball the measurements. Don't trick yourself into believing 4 scoops will give you 4 times the tomatoes. It will completely backfire. Do not pour it on 3 or 4 times a summer. And never sprinkle the raw powder directly onto the dirt. If you give them too much, the leaf margins will scorch brown and crisp up. Fresh stems will contort into weird spirals, and your harvest will completely crash. The worst part is, a poison plant looks nearly identical to a starving one, but you caused it by being heavy-handed, and an overdose takes years of heavy rain to wash out of your garden. Also, keep in mind this is a household cleaner. It is dangerous if ingested by kids or pets. Store the box high up on a secure shelf. Write massive warning labels on your mixing jug so nobody thinks it's drinking water. Handle it with the exact same caution you use for bleach or drain cleaner under the kitchen sink. When respected, it is totally safe and has been utilized responsibly by American growers for a century. So here is your application calendar. You will do this exactly twice per summer, and getting the dates right is almost as vital as the dosage. Your first dose happens right when the vines begin producing their initial clusters of blossoms. For most regions, that hits roughly 4 to 6 weeks after planting your seedlings outside. So, a mid-May planting means a late June application. Just look for the visual trigger. Step into the garden and spot the first little yellow petals opening up near the bottom of the plant. You might even see the very first flower wilting to reveal a tiny green bump behind it. That is your window. The plant is suddenly screaming for boron to help lock in those fruits. Hitting it with this mixture right then dramatically boosts the percentage of blossoms that actually stick instead of dropping. Getting those early flowers to hold dictates the sheer volume of your overall harvest. The second dose happens when those initial tomatoes swell to the size of a golf ball. Typically, that's 8 to 10 weeks post-transplant. The vine is now working in overdrive, pushing out multiple flower clusters while simultaneously pumping sugar into the existing fruit. This secondary pour keeps the boron tank full during peak demand, ensuring the late-season tomatoes get the exact same benefits as the early ones. Always water this in during the cool morning hours, say 6 to 9 or late in the evening past 7. Never do it under the blazing midday sun, which will just evaporate the moisture and leave the minerals baked onto the surface crust. Gently pour your 1.5 cups in a wide ring around the base, staying 3 or 4 inches away from the stalk to prevent shock. You want to soak the area where the invisible root hairs actually drink. 20 to 30 vines per batch. First flowers, then golf ball size. 2 trips to the garden. That is the whole yearly routine. And remember, more will only hurt your garden. You might be wondering why so much American dirt is starved of this mineral to begin with. It isn't your fault, and your yard isn't uniquely broken. The explanation goes back 10,000 years. The ancient genetic ancestors of our modern tomatoes weren't born here. They originated high in the Andes across Peru and Ecuador. They grew in volcanic dirt, broken down from ancient rock that inherently contained up to 4 times the boron levels of a standard backyard in the States. The entire biological machinery of the tomato was perfectly calibrated by evolution to thrive in a boron-heavy environment. The plant aggressively demands it because, historically, it was always swimming in it. Then, humans hauled the seeds to Europe and North America. We stuck them in sandy beaches, frozen glacial soils, and heavy red southern clays. Most of these environments lacked adequate boron from day one, and our farming practices only degraded it further. Over a century of aggressive harvesting sucked whatever trace minerals existed right out of the ground and onto our dinner plates. Plus, adding lime to balance soil pH actually traps remaining boron, locking it away from the roots entirely. The result is a massive, invisible deficiency stretching coast to coast that practically nobody diagnoses correctly. Standard soil kits ignore it. Generic fertilizers skip it. The gardening books rarely bring it up. So, thousands of growers stare at their pathetic vines every August, cursing the bugs and the weather, completely unaware the cure is sitting next to their washing machine for less than the price of a sandwich. The story that always sticks with me is about a teacher named Patricia, who manages an elementary school garden down in El Paso, Texas. She launched the project with 20 wooden planter boxes and a group of 4th graders. Programs like that only survive if the kids actually get to pull food out of the dirt. But for the first few seasons, the tomato plants looked so pathetic, she almost canceled the entire initiative. The earth down there is incredibly dense and alkaline. The summers are scorching. The generic gardening advice she read online was completely failing her. She was on the verge of throwing in the towel when an elderly, retired crop scientist who volunteered around the school clued her into the borax trick. He guided her on how to carefully adapt the measurements for her harsh dirt, ensuring everything was precise. She followed his rules flawlessly. That late summer, those same 20 struggling planter boxes exploded, producing yields that dwarfed anything the school had ever managed before. The kids were absolutely stunned. They were hauling giant tomatoes indoors by the armload, feeding their own families, and dropping massive crates off at the local food pantry. The excitement was so contagious that the garden expanded to 40 boxes the following spring, branching out into cucumbers and peppers. Patricia has been leading that program for well over a decade now. She has introduced thousands of kids to the joy of growing and supplied literal tons of fresh produce to the El Paso Food Bank. And the budget for the crucial trace mineral that makes it all happen is roughly a few dollars a year. In her hands, a cheap cardboard box of soap stopped being a clever gardening hack and transformed into a lifeline for a community that desperately needed fresh groceries. So, there you have it. 2 perfectly flat scoops, 1 jug of lukewarm water, applied gently at the first blossom and again at golf ball size. Measured strictly, never applied a 3rd time, and stored safely out of reach. This is the exact wisdom an extension agent handed a desperate Oklahoma farmer during the horrors of the Dust Bowl in 1934. The wisdom that farmer gave to his boy Earl Whitaker, who took it out west and used it to grow traffic-stopping tomatoes for 41 summers in Bakersfield. That vintage box Earl picked up for under $1 in the late 70s is actually still sitting on a shelf. His grandson held on to it after Earl passed away. The cardboard is faded soft, the price tag still says 98 cents, and if you tilt it, there is still white powder rattling around inside. 41 years of legendary gardening pulled from a single package, and it hasn't even run out yet. That is the beauty of true, generational knowledge. It doesn't break down like a machine, and it doesn't spoil like a bag of synthetic chemicals. It was practically free when it was written on a scrap of paper nearly a century ago, and it is practically free today. The only true threat to this kind of wisdom is silence. It only dies if the folks who know it refuse to hand it down. That is the real danger. So, I am challenging you to do this. Test it out this spring on a few vines or on your entire plot. and then return to this video to drop a comment letting me know how your harvest turned out. While you are down there, tell me if you remember your own parents or grandparents keeping a box of this stuff near the garden. So many families did, and an awful lot of us simply let the memory fade. I read every single comment, and whenever one of you shares a memory like that, it triggers a light bulb for 20 other people scrolling through. If this video brought you value, please subscribe and stick around. We are building a massive community here, dedicated to reviving the practical, dirt-cheap skills that got swept under the rug while the rest of the country was reaching for the expensive, shiny bags at the store. Next week, I will reveal an incredible tactic the old-timers used to force their green bean plants to keep producing massive yields right up until the freezing winter hits, long after the neighbors' gardens have turned brown and died. All you need is a pair of clippers and a handful of yard waste most folks toss straight in the garbage. Until we meet again, measure those 2 flat spoons, water them in gently, and make sure you pass this secret down to your own kids and grandkids. Because ultimately, the only safe place for this kind of legacy is in the hands of the next grower who remembers exactly who taught them how to do it.